Your brain doesn't just grow, peak, and then slowly decline, it moves through dramatic, little-known turning points that can completely change how you think, feel, and age. And this is the part most people miss: what you call being an adult may actually still be adolescence in your brain. The big discovery in simple terms. A large scientific study has found that the brain does not change in one smooth, gradual curve from childhood to old age. Instead, it appears to move through 5 distinct life phases, with 4 especially important milestone ages: 9, 32, 66, and 83. These milestones are based on how the connections between brain cells are organized and how efficiently different brain regions communicate. Researchers used brain scans from around 4,000 people aged up to 90 years old to map how these connections shift over time. From this data, they concluded that what we typically call adolescence actually stretches all their way into the early 30s, and that our brain peaks in certain functions during that extended adolescent phase. This has huge implications for how we think about mental health, learning, work, and even aging. The 5 phases of brain life. According to the study, your brain can be divided into these 5 broad phases. Childhood, birth to 9 years. Adolescence, 9 to 32 years. Adulthood, 32 to 66 years. Early aging, 66 to 83 years. Late aging, 83 years onward. Of course, these are averages, not strict rules. Some people will hit these brain milestones a bit earlier or later, just like some kids hit puberty sooner than others. But even with this natural variation, the researchers were struck by how clearly these age ranges showed up in the data. Phase 1, childhood, birth, 9 years. In childhood, the brain is in rapid construction mode. It is growing quickly in size while also producing a huge number of connections between brain cells, called synapses. This early stage is a bit like overbuilding a city's road network. The brain creates more routes than it will actually need later. At the same time, the brain starts to prune back some of these extra connections. This pruning process removes weaker or less used pathways so that important ones can eventually become stronger. Interestingly, during this stage the brain is actually less efficient overall. You can think of it like a child wandering freely in a park, taking winding, unplanned paths instead of going in a straight line from point A to point B. This apparent inefficiency is not a flaw, it is part of how children explore, learn language, and absorb complex skills through trial and error. If you have ever noticed how kids can be easily distracted but also incredibly creative, this messy, flexible wiring is likely a big reason why. Phase 2, extended adolescence, 9 to 32 years. Around age 9, something dramatic happens. The brain shifts from loose, exploratory wiring into a phase of ruthless efficiency. Connections are reorganized so that signals can travel more directly and more reliably. Researchers describe this change as one of the most profound transitions in brain development. This is also the phase when the risk of mental health disorders is highest. Conditions such as anxiety, depression, and some other psychiatric disorders often begin during adolescence and young adulthood. The timing makes sense. The brain's wiring is being reshaped, which can make some people more vulnerable depending on genetics, environment, and life experiences. Here's where it gets controversial. The study supports the idea that adolescence is not just the teenage years at all. Earlier research already suggested that the adolescent brain continues developing into the 20s. This new evidence goes further, showing that the same adolescent brain phase can extend up to about 32 years old. In other words, someone in their early 30s may still have a brain that behaves more like a supercharged, optimizing adolescent brain than a fully settled, adult one. During this extended adolescence, the brain's network of neurons becomes more efficient than at any other time in life. Measures of brain performance and certain cognitive abilities tend to peak in the early 30s, which fits well with this pattern. What surprises many people is that the brain remains in the same overarching phase from 9 all the way through 32, even though life circumstances shift dramatically, from school years to early career, relationships, and often starting a family. This raises a provocative question: if the brain is technically still in an adolescent phase until the early 30s, should society rethink how it treats major decisions like criminal responsibility, long-term debt, or even career expectations for people in their 20s? Phase 3, Adulthood, 32 to 66 years. From about 32 to 66, the brain enters its longest and most stable period. This could be thought of as their settled adult phase. The rapid reshaping that defined adolescence slows down. The overall structure of brain networks becomes more consistent. However, during this stable period, the earlier gains in network efficiency begin to gradually reverse. The change is not dramatic or sudden, but the trend moves away from the peak efficiency of the early 30s. This aligns with the idea that many people experience a plateau in intelligence and personality traits across midlife. That doesn't mean learning stops or that people cannot change. Instead, it suggests that the brain's basic wiring pattern is less in flux. Skills, habits, and personality traits tend to become more solidified. People might feel more themselves and more consistent over time, even though they are still capable of growth and adaptation. This is also a period where experience can compensate for small declines in raw processing speed. For example, a 50-year-old might solve problems more slowly than a 30-year-old in some tasks, but draw on far deeper experience and pattern recognition. Phase 4, Early Aging, 66 to 83 years. Around 66, the brain moves into what the researchers call early aging. Contrary to many stereotypes, this is not a sudden, steep decline. Instead, it is better understood as a reorganization of how the brain's networks work together. Earlier in life, the brain may operate more like a single, tightly coordinated system. In early aging, it gradually becomes more segmented into smaller, closely cooperating regions. A helpful analogy is a band whose members start working on solo projects. Each group still functions well internally, but the whole ensemble is less unified. Even though the study focused on people with healthy brains, this is also the time in life when conditions like dementia and high blood pressure, which can affect the brain, become more common. These medical issues can interact with the natural changes in brain networks, potentially amplifying problems with memory, attention, or thinking speed. Still, many people in this age group remain mentally sharp. Lifestyle factors such as physical activity, mental engagement, social connection, and good cardiovascular health can make a meaningful difference in how these brain changes are experienced day to day. Phase 5, Late Aging, 83 plus years. From about 83 onward, the brain enters the late aging phase. The researchers had fewer brain scans in this group, simply because it is harder to find a large number of very old adults in excellent enough health to take part. That makes this stage somewhat less precisely understood. Even with limited data, the patterns seen in early aging appear to continue and intensify. The same kinds of network shifts occur, but in a more pronounced way. The brain's regions may become even more functionally separate, and efficiency tends to decrease further. Yet there is a fascinating nuance here. Many people in their late 80s and beyond still function remarkably well. The fact that some individuals in this age group can stay mentally resilient suggests that brain aging is not identical for everyone, and that factors across the entire lifespan, education, lifestyle, health, and even social roles, might influence how late-age changes play out. Why these ages matter so much? One of the most striking aspects of the research is how well these brain phases line up with major life milestones. Around 9 corresponds roughly to the onset of puberty and big emotional and social shifts. Around 32 often matches significant social changes such as advancing careers, long-term partnerships, and parenthood. Around 66, close to typical retirement ages and the appearance of more health concerns. Around 83, a stage where health and independence become major themes in many people's lives. The lead researcher noted being especially surprised by how clearly these age points lined up with things like puberty, later life health risks, and the big transitions often seen in early 30s. This connection suggests that what happens in society at these ages is not purely cultural, it may also have a biological root in how our brains are wired at those times. What experts say about brain wiring? The study has sparked enthusiasm among brain scientists. Several experts have pointed out that many neurodevelopmentally, mental health, and neurological conditions are linked to the way the brain's wiring is organized.